doesn't he learn his lesson from all the failed economic experiments that only benefit insiders with tax havens like him and get rid of all the taxes on gas for all of the year?
Mr. Speaker, to learn a lesson, you have to have ears to hear. There are some on the benches opposite who've been listening, Mr. Speaker.
Fiery back and forth there in question period this past week as the Conservatives criticized the government for not tackling rising fuel costs more aggressively than what they've announced. The Prime Minister taking a shot at Pierre Poilievre and the recent defections to the Liberal benches. So what does this mean for Parliament moving forward? What tools do the Conservatives have to be an effective official opposition? Let's bring in our Sunday Scrum. Erin Wherry is a senior writer here in the Parliamentary Bureau for CBC. Ian Bailey is a politics reporter for the Globe and Mail. And Marie Vastel is back, and I'm delighted to see her, an editorial writer with Devoir. Good to see you all this morning. We're going to talk about the Liberals and the majority in the next hour, but thought I'd start here with the Conservatives because things have changed for them too. I'm also in the next hour talk to Andrew Scheer, who's not pleased that the government's going to change the committee makeup as well. From that exchange and what you saw last week, Erin, how would you say the Conservatives are handling this new reality?
I mean, I think their first move has really been to attack kind of the legitimacy of this majority. You know, you saw that even before they had gotten over the Liberals had gotten over the 172 threshold. You know, Pierre Poilievre's line about backroom deals and so on and so forth, and Andrew Scheer coming out fairly quickly to say that it would be improper for the Liberals to change the committee lineup, or maybe not improper, but it would be, you know, they'd be doing it to sort of scuttle opposition investigations. I think that's going to be one strain of it. I think the other part of it will probably be looking for signs of overreach. You know, now that the Liberals have a majority, you get to kind of make the argument that they're abusing it. But I think, I mean, the other thing I'm watching for, and I think the bigger part of it will be, you know, it wasn't that long ago that Pierre Poilievre was offering to be more constructive and collaborative. But now that his votes aren't necessary to get legislation through the House, and now that he doesn't have to worry about accidentally triggering an election, does he become more full-throated in his opposition to the government? Does he kind of revert back to his old ways and become sort of a very loud critic of this government? And I think you maybe saw a hint of that with his comments about the Prime Minister being, quote unquote, badly educated on economics.
Yeah, Ian, that is sort of what made me think that in this majority, there is some freedom for Pierre Poilievre and the kind of politician that he is. And that is, I think, pretty aggressively going after the government, which, you know, is partly his job. But I wonder what that tells you about how he's going to move forward.
Well, we're a long way from Joe Rogan and Mr. Poilievre presenting a kind of moderate, thoughtful, kind of accessible image that might have appealed to voters who aren't necessarily conservative. A majority government makes a big target for the opposition, and it also creates a lot of responsibility for the Prime Minister, but a big target for Mr. Poilievre. And it seems from his allegations in the last week, the Prime Minister is not very good at math, despite his education at Harvard and Oxford and running 2 central banks, that this is where the Conservatives are going to go, and why not? It worked in past. It remains to be seen whether this is going to move the dial going ahead, but it certainly seems absent some other change where they're going. I guess the one risk in all of this is voters who had maybe twigged to the more moderate Pierre Poilievre, or maybe like that, or were paying attention, maybe a bit confused by this shift to the past, and then what happens if there's yet another shift down the way as circumstances change in Ottawa in ways that we possibly can't see right now.
Yeah, there's lots of things to criticize the Prime Minister for, Marie. I'm not sure his education would be top of the list for me. I thought Dimitri Soudis, who was the Director of Communications to Stephen Harper last week on X, posted sort of actually the better way, in his view, to do this, and that is to set expectations high, and then for Pierre Poilievre to be able to call out the Prime Minister if he fails. What do you make of what we're seeing from Mr. Poilievre in this first week, and the fact that, you know, he does have a different approach now? He'll have to, because he has fewer levers.
Well, I mean, the Prime Minister has set the expectations extremely high himself.
Sure.
So there's not even that much work for Mr. Poilievre to do, right? To hold him to account to what he has promised during the campaign and during the last year. And I think the issue with Mr. Poilievre is that he constantly tries to change his tone, tries to change his approach, and we see it for a few days, maybe a few weeks, but he always goes back to his natural instincts, if I can say, the fighter side of him. And that's not what's working with Canadians. And I would also remind him that it's not what works with his part of his caucus, a growing part of his caucus, I would say. And so that is also the risk that, sure, there's this courting his base and going back to the basic, criticizing opposition, but more and more his own caucus is sort of yearning for constructive opposition, and that's really where he should use this time to do that. I mean, this 3 years ahead of him is the worst thing that could happen. We've said it over and over this week because there's plenty of time to find someone else who would be more palatable to Canadian voters and who they would actually listen to. They've mostly tuned him out, and he needs to reconcile with those people and also not get pushed out by his caucus. And the problem is with things like criticizing Mr. Carney's education or his work earlier in his career is it, quite frankly, makes no sense. And at a certain point, when Mr. Poilievre just constantly says everything is bad, everything is broken, you kind of start sounding like the little boy who cried wolf. You do need sometimes to recognize that some policies, while imperfect, while the gas pause could have been broader, is still partly a good idea. And I think that's what he needs to start doing, because if he just always says everything is wrong, people just stop listening. They already have, and they will just keep not listening.
Yeah, I mean, to Marie's point, Aaron, time is both a good and a bad thing for Mr. Poilievre. It may mean that he will be the leader into the next election, because I don't hear any intense rumbling or serious rumbling. People seem to just be happy that there's no election, because some of them were frankly worried they were going to lose their seats.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't look like there's a push, to do something right away, or at least in the short term. That said, the flip side of that is the other part of not having an election anytime soon is that he's got to survive 3 more years in opposition. If the Conservatives are down by, say, 10 points a year from now or 2 years from now, then how do Conservative MPs start to feel? Going back to Justin Trudeau's time, what really doomed him was that a bunch of MPs looked around and said, we're going to lose our seats with this guy as our leader. And I think that ultimately is what determines these things. And so, yes, it's probably good for him that he doesn't have to face an election anytime soon. But that isn't necessarily mean that things are going to get better. And I think he's obviously betting to a certain extent on things getting harder for Mark Carney. And I think that's probably to some degree a safe bet. But I don't know that things are necessarily going to get easier for Pierre Poilievre.
What kind of levers then, Ian, does the opposition leader have in this moment? If he doesn't have balance of power, if he doesn't have a majority on a committee, what kinds of things can he do to push the government?
Well, it's rather limited. I mean, Mr. Poilievre can do what he is doing. He can, hold news conferences, deliver speeches. Obviously, there's party advertising to sort of get his message out there. But it's really limited, I think. And so obviously, as Aaron pointed out, I mean, 3 years is Mr. Carney has ruled out an election. And I assume that absent some development I can't foresee, he's going to stick to that. So it's remarkable. There probably won't be an election for 3 years. And so Mr. Poilievre has a long run till the next election. I'm reminded of something that former BC Premier John Horgan said about being in opposition. I don't have the exact quote, but he basically said it's a tough, grueling job, being basically professionally miserable and negative. So in that respect, I feel Mr. Poilievre has a really tough job to keep this act up. It's an important act in our democracy, but to keep this up for 3 years, it seems like every month is a year these days. There's so much going on, and he has to keep this going for quite some time.
Our plan for Canada is gaining momentum, and it will work, but we are not going to fix all our problems tomorrow. And there will be setbacks along the way. The biggest payoffs will take time. So we know that Canadians need a boost today and a bridge to tomorrow. It's our country. It's our future. We are taking back control to build Canada strong. It's already working. Let's keep going.
That was the Prime Minister in a new video posted on his social media feeds this morning. He says it's based on a practice he developed during the 2008 financial crisis called forward guidance, and how that is guiding his party. With the majority secured, the focus shifts from winning support to delivering results, such as, for instance, that excise fuel tax holiday. How does all of this shape the government's agenda? Let's bring back our Sunday Scrum. Wherry, senior writer in the Parliamentary Bureau here at CBC. Ian Bailey, politics reporter for the Globe and Mail, and Marie Vastel, editorial writer with Le Devoir. So I'm going to throw that video at you, if that's okay, even if you haven't watched the whole thing. We'll start there. Marie, the Prime Minister saying that this is something apparently he's going to do regularly. I read the transcript of the video. There's not a lot of new information in there, but I guess it's a way for him to try and speak directly to Canadians. What do you make of why he might be doing that in this moment?
Well, there's clearly a lot of anxiety. We see it around us. We see it when we go grocery shopping, filling our gas tank. And I think he's taking that into account and addressing it. Communications-wise, it's probably very smart. Transparency-wise, I don't know. What I was going to say actually about, what this majority means and which was the theme of the block was actually I was going to say that the Prime Minister has said he'd be magnanimous with the opposition. He has said that he would still collaborate, but what we've seen in his minority is that he does have a tendency to forget transparency and parliamentary accountability as a Prime Minister. And these videos are nice politically, but he also could have had a press conference and answered questions from media, which are questions from Canadians. Or he could have had a debate in the House of Commons. There's a lot of ways he could have had this conversation. Maybe he will,
yes,
but
sure.
We saw it, on the conflict in the Middle East, and when he had a first position on the war in Iran, and then a second position on possibly helping in the Strait of Hormuz. There are things that he has said where I would have liked to see more transparency. And so this video, while I think it's smart, concerns me for what's to come if he now has a majority.
Yeah, sometimes what is smart politically isn't always the best thing
democratically
for
great.
Yes, that's right, for Canadians and for people trying to do their jobs like us. Ian, why do you think he's choosing now to do this? And did you, I don't know if you've watched it, but just from that clip, whether you take anything from the tone that he's trying to suggest here to Canadians in this moment?
Well, Canadians are busy, and so it's probably a smart move by the Prime Minister to boil it down and to take a few minutes to talk about where he's going on specific issues. There's no breaking news in this video,
no,
but it's short and it's straightforward, and perhaps it's something, frankly, that other party leaders and the House of Commons might want to try. Just I know if they use videos to sort of get their messages out, but just sort of one sum-it-up video. The Prime Minister, he did hold a news conference earlier this week after the by-elections, and I think one of the challenges for him going ahead is, he talked about working with other parties and humility, but he also expressed some impatience with, I guess, the parliamentary process and showboating in aspects of committees. So I think the challenge for him going ahead is going to be reconciling, his comments about humility and that kind of thing with being impatient and using this majority to push his agenda forward. It will be interesting to see now that he has a majority how future videos go as things get more challenging in the government, in the House. That'll be interesting to see as it plays out. And I would say going to the Conservatives are concerned about committees and floor crossers and such. But one thing I would say is that the one thing we know about the future is that at some point in the future, there will be a Conservative government, and I'm sure they will adjust committees to their benefit and also welcome floor crossers.
Yeah. Yes, it's funny how that changes when you're in the position of power.
Indeed.
Aaron, I'll get you to weigh in on the video, and anything else you want to take it. I would note that one of our producers smartly said it looked an awful lot like remember Stephen Harper's 24 Sussex videos, where he would do the same thing. He would put out these videos to explain things the government's doing, and he was highly criticized at the time for the exact thing that Marie pointed out, and that was not being open with the media. I should say that he did fewer press conferences than the current Prime Minister, but still.
Yeah, to me, actually, it reminds me a bit more of sort of weekly presidential addresses. And I saw someone online already compare it to, FDR's fireside chats. And I think there's some of that. And I think there's also a bit of the current sort of more recent trend towards longer videos and explanation and using the online medium for politicians to kind of explain themselves at some length. I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with it. I think, to Marie's point, the problem becomes if it is coming at the expense of other things. If he's not going to question period and not holding news conferences, then I think it will be fair to ask why he's doing this. I think the other piece of it is, and what it makes me wonder is whether he's preparing himself for a pretty challenging few years, and whether this is part of both conditioning Canadians to expect that and sort of setting up a way that he can start to walk Canadians through some of those challenges above and beyond news conferences and question period, to really try to communicate directly with Canadians about what's happening and why, and what the government is thinking. I think that is, as much, we talked about this a little in the last block, as much as the Prime Minister has given himself time, that time's not necessarily going to be super easy. And I think as much as that might give them more time to do things, it also means they have to start preparing themselves for a bit of a long haul now.
Yeah, and this is where, having the majority is complicated. As you said on the previous block there, Marie, that the government has big expectations that they have set for themselves, and they have difficult things to do, whether it be, getting rid of people in the public service, making choices for defense spending instead of other things, and somehow finding some way forward with the U.S. president. Does the majority in some ways raise expectations further, because now the Prime Minister doesn't have anyone to blame?
Yes, and also it gives him time to unavoidably disappoint. Not because it's his fault necessarily, because geopolitical transformations, because Donald Trump is unpredictable, because the economy is in great difficulty. And so it gives him the gift of time, which is precious for him to actually progress on what he's promised, but it also gives him time to not attain every goal he set. I would also argue that this majority hopefully would also be an opportunity. He's, such a prime minister in a hurry, to also be in a hurry to attack other things. Obviously, the economy, diversifying trade is the greatest priority, dealing with this bilateral and trade relationship with the U.S. But there are also things that this government has not really acted on much in its first year, perhaps because it was in a minority, or things where it's had setbacks. But there's also urgency. The Prime Minister during the election kept saying, "Build, baby, build" was his slogan. There's also an urgency to protect certain things. The Liberal members just voted to bring in rules for youth on social media and chatbots. That's a file where they haven't really done much other than consult for a year. On the environment, there have been a lot of setbacks. That's something where presumably if he has time to focus on other things, maybe he could bring a little bit of a better balance. And if not for moral preoccupation of the Prime Minister, I'm not saying he doesn't have them, but if not strictly for that, perhaps also for his caucus, because his majority is quite slim, quite fragile, and you still need to make sure that everyone in that big white tent remains happy. Otherwise, they could threaten not to vote with you on certain things or other sort of I don't want to say blackmail, it's kind of a harsh word, but that sentiment.
Trading ideas, perhaps.
Yes.
Ian, what do you think it changes for the government in terms of how fast they need to start delivering? Because that's where the focus now has to shift.
Well, I think one thing to a point that Marie's making, I think there's an urgency here because of the precarious nature of the majority. I mean, I think Justice Minister Sean Fraser made this point in the Scrum this week. Things change, people leave. A lot of these MPs have been around for a while. I mean, it's a very slim majority. Folks could leave, take jobs, face health issues, so that majority could go away. So I wonder if there's an urgency on this government to move quickly while they have a majority. absent floor crossers or more floor crossers, this majority may not last long. And the Prime Minister seems to have ruled, well, he doesn't seem, he has ruled out an election at any time soon. So there may be an impetus to get going on some of this stuff.